Destiny is here with a new expansion, Lightfall, and as is par for the course with Bungie, we've had a lot of systems tweaked and reworked. The game has had a major emphasis on build crafting for a long time and still does despite the recent simplification of the mod system. So, if you're looking for a refresher or introduction to how all this crazy stuff works, you've come to the right place. I will be going through every possible piece of information that I can, or at least the important ones. Everything will also be time-stamped in the description as well as organized into chapters. So if you're looking for something specific or want to skip over details you already know, go right ahead. Alright, where to begin? Well, I guess if you're new, what do I even mean by a build in the first place? In a nutshell, I really just mean a combination of weapons, armor, and other effects to do something special. For example, making a build on Warlock that lets me pump out as many grenades as I possibly can. That sort of thing. Buildcrafting in Destiny has a lot of different layers to it. Individually, I would say these layers are rather straightforward, but when combining everything, I can understand how it would appear complicated or overwhelming. At a base level, your build in Destiny consists of your subclass, your stats, your gear, and your mods. Let's start with going over the stats, because that will form the basis of everything. Destiny has a set of 6 stats tied to your character, 3 of which I will call class stats, and the other 3 I will call ability stats. These aren't official names, but I will explain my reasoning in a moment as to why I'm calling them that. There are 2 primary ways to get stat bonuses, through your armor and through your subclasses fragments. Your armor will randomly drop with different distributions of these stats, typically in a preset range, which will then combine into a total stat gain for the armor piece. The higher the stat total, the better your armor is. When it comes to the armor itself, you will usually see the stat total fall anywhere between 48 to 71 points, with 71 being extremely rare. There may be some instances I'm not aware of where the total could be lower or higher than this, but it honestly doesn't really matter. As for your subclasses fragments, these augments can give bonuses or take away from your stats depending on what they do. Now, to back it up to the stats themselves for a moment. As I said earlier, there are 6 of them, broken up into 2 different categories. The class stats consist of mobility, resilience, and recovery. Mobility increases your movement speed and jump height. Resilience increases your maximum health, overshield capacity, as well as granting you a percentage of damage resistance against PvE enemies. And recovery increases the speed at which your health regen kicks back into effect after taking damage. The reason I called these class stats is because each one also has a secondary effect depending on which class you play. Mobility affects the speed at which the Hunter Dodge class ability recharges. Resilience does the same for the Titan's class ability, and Recovery doing the same for Warlocks. Keeping these stats in mind is very important when creating any build of any level. Buildcrafting 101 essentially. The next 3 stats, or ability stats as I call them, are much more straightforward. Discipline determines how quickly your grenade abilities recharge. Intellect does the exact same thing for your super, and Strength does the exact same thing once again for your melee ability. There are no secondary effects here. Now, I've been talking a lot about cooldowns for all of these different abilities for a bit, and how the stats affect them. But if you're brand new and don't know what I'm talking about, take a look here. Every single ability or super of any kind in the game has a base cooldown. General rule of thumb, the stronger something is or is supposed to be, typically the longer the cooldown. As an example, the grapple grenade for Strand has a base cooldown of 1 minute and 45 seconds, while the shackle grenade has a base cooldown of 2 minutes and 32 seconds. You can use stats to decrease these cooldowns and acquire abilities faster. There's a lot of different nuances. For example, all the supers in the games are organized into different cooldown tiers, but it's not overly important unless you're trying to min-max the hell out of your build, and if you're that deep down the rabbit hole, you probably don't need this video. Alright, now that you know what all of these stats do, at least at a base level, there's another important thing you need to know. These stats are only effective in multiples of 10. What do I mean by that? Well, you see how I have 92 recovery here? This is what's called Tier 9 recovery. There's 10 tiers in total. And basically, there's no difference between a stat of, say, 90 or 99. You only get the bonus of the next tier once you've increased your stat a whole 10 points. So for example, at Tier 9 Recovery, I have a 34% increase to my health regen speed. I won't get any further increase to that bonus unless I can hit at least 100 Recovery. That's when you hit Tier 10 and you've capped out. This applies to all 6 of your armor stats. Now, if I had to give a brief review of each stat in order, Mobility is pretty crucial for hunters, but not so much for literally anyone else. There are definitely very specific scenarios where I've used mobility in the past, typically if I'm doing some weird thing in PvE or really want to feel fast in PvP, but as a whole, you can largely ignore this stat if you play Warlock or Titan. Resilience was made the best stat in the game for pretty much everyone last year, offering a 40% damage reduction against PvE enemies. In Lightfall, it got reworked so tier 10 offers 30% instead, but the lower tiers offer a bit more than they used to, at least I think they do. As of right now, definitely invest in this stat. Recovery is great for Warlock, and in my opinion used to be the best stat in the game, but with the resilience changes and some other things, it's not quite as important. I would not completely ignore it, but you don't have to go after tier 10 unless you really feel like you need it for something, or just have the armor to where you can. Discipline is great because of how strong grenades are. However, there are also a lot of ways to generate grenade energy, so if your weapons or mods or subclass fragments take care of that for you, you might not need it as much. Intellect used to be essential, definitely in PvP, but a year or two ago, however long it was, Bungie reworked the way super energy is generated, and all the supers have much longer base cooldowns than they used to, with the primary way to build up your super being just to deal damage with your guns. If you're really trying to get the most you can out of your super, feel free to build into Intellect, otherwise you can ignore it. And finally, Strength. Strength is in a similar spot to Discipline, but it really depends on what your build is and the class you play. If your build revolves around your melee for whatever reason, build into it, have at it. If not, don't worry about it. Another note for stats and how you should build into them, there's really not any right answer. Most of the time, people will build into 2 main stats and get whatever they can out of the rest. If you're really lucky with your armor drops, you can even get 3 different stats to tier 10, but that's a lot more rare, and it's really not required for anything, just nice to have. There's a nice website you can log into with your Bungie account called D2 Armor Picker. You can select what tiers of stats you want to build into, and it'll select armor pieces from your character and your vault to fit the bill. Another, one last thing I promised that I want to mention about the stats themselves before we move on, is about how the stats are distributed on your armor drops. Stat totals are random, but random within a set of rules. You see, your armor drops can spike in different stat categories, so you might end up having the bare minimum of, say, 2 mobility, but then 30 whole points of recovery. When it comes to these spikes, you can usually only have 1 major spike in any 3 of your class stats, and 1 major spike in your ability stats, so you would never end up with 30 resilience and 30 recovery on an armor piece. For example, on my boots here, I have 1 major bump of 24 in recovery, and the same bump in discipline, because they are in the 2 different categories. Alright, that covers all the basics of the core stats themselves. Now, I want to touch on exotics. Exotics. I'd be shocked if you didn't already know what they were, but for the uninitiated, they are the yellow weapons and armor pieces you can get. You can equip 1 exotic armor piece and 1 exotic weapon at a time. They all have very unique abilities and traits, and at least for armor, there is no reason not to use a piece. If stats form the foundation of your build, exotics form the core. As a quick example, I'm currently using the Nezarec Sin exotic helmet for Warlocks. As for what it does, it allows void damage kills I get from any source at all, weapon, ability, it does not matter, to increase the recharge rate of all of my abilities. Very simple, but very versatile. So, go through your exotics, see what you have, and use one. You don't have to use one if you don't want to, but there's no reason not to unless you just really care about your fashion. Exotic weapons are also very powerful, but you can make plenty of builds without using them, and sometimes it's better not to, depending on the situation. And that's all you really need to know about exotics at a base level. Now, let's talk about armor and armor mods. This is a big one. In Lightfall, Bungie did this really neat thing of giving us a mod customization screen. On this screen, you can examine all of your armor and weapons in one place and change whatever you need to. Speaking of armor, every armor piece has what we call energy levels. Essentially, your armor will have a level, 1 to 10, that determines how much space you have for different mods. You can upgrade these levels by using Glimmer, Legendary Shards, and different upgrade materials, Enhancement Cores, Prisms, and Ascendant Shards. When you fully upgrade a piece of armor, it is considered Masterworked, and it gains a gold border around it. This means you get 10 energy to spend on mods, and it even grants a bonus to your armor stats, 2 bonus points to each stat for a grand total of a 12-point bonus. Now, I keep talking about mods, but what are they? Well, they're basically augments you can slot into your armor that change the way you play. and Bungie just reworked the entire system in Lightfall, making it way easier for people to get into. This also had the unfortunate side effect of dumbing down the experience for more veteran players. However, there is still plenty of value to the potency of these mods that are here. As for how you get them, most people probably already have them all unlocked, or at least most of them, but if you're missing some, you can unlock them through leveling up your Guardian ranks. Before we deep dive into how all this works, I want to say there is a lot to go over here, and while I will try my best to explain it in as simple terms as possible, feel free to pause or rewind as needed. Or, if you just want to explore it yourself, skip ahead. But without further ado, let's begin. Every armor piece in Destiny will have at least 4 mod slots. There are some cases where a piece of armor can have 5 slots, but that only applies to armor obtained from raids or master dungeons. Raid armor will have an extra slot dedicated to mods that grant bonuses within that raid, and only within that raid, while master dungeons can grant artifice armor, which has a 5th armor slot to grant a 3-point bonus to any stat for free. The first mod slot in the far left is a general use armor mod slot. Here, you can put a mod in that will give you either a 5-point or 10-point buff to any stat of your choosing. For example, I currently have a minor resilience mod on, which gives me 5 extra points of resilience, putting me at exactly tier 10. This also costs 2 energy to equip, leaving me 8 energy left to equip any mods I wish in the other slots. All mods have varying energy costs based on their strength and function. Now, the remaining 3 mod slots are all the same, but have different mod types depending on the piece of armor. For example, helmet-specific mods can only be equipped on your helmet, gauntlet-specific mods on your gauntlets, and so on and so forth. Let's take a closer look at the helmet mods and you'll see what I mean. Starting from the top, let's look at these ammo finder and ammo scout mods. So right here, we have the special ammo finder mod. It costs 3 energy to equip, and doing so increases the chances of spawning special ammo on a kill. Using primary weapons gives this a higher chance of activating, with exotic primaries being the best at this. And if you want, you can run multiple copies of this mod to get more ammo when you pick up one of the ammo bricks spawned to do this effect. Heavy Ammo Finder has the exact same effect, but for heavy ammo, you guessed it. These are considered helmet mods. You can only use them on your helmet and nowhere else. Mods specific to armor piece types are split into categories. Ammo finders and ammo scouts will only ever be on your helmet, but then damage resistance mods will only ever be available on your chest piece. Now, I'm going to go ahead and take the time to go over the basics of all these mods, or at the very least, what you can expect. But if you would rather just mess with it yourself, skip ahead. We'll have everything set up into chapters, and we can move on to the next part of the mod system once you've done that. Okay, going back to the helmet mods, in addition to ammo finders, you can also find ammo scout mods, siphon mods, targeting mods, and mods relating to your super energy on your helmet. Ammo scouts generate ammo for your teammates anytime one of your equipped ammo finders makes ammo for yourself. They work hand in hand together. So, if your ammo finder makes you some heavy ammo, and then you also have heavy ammo scout, your teammates will get heavy ammo too. Siphon mods are how you are able to make orbs of power. Orbs of power are little balls of light that fall on the ground. They can be made in a variety of ways, but the most common way is when someone casts their super or gets super kills. When you pick up an orb of power, they grant you super energy. They can even interact with other certain mods, which I'll touch more on later. So, if I equipped the Arc Siphon mod here, getting rapid kills with any arc weapon would generate orbs for me and my team. Targeting mods give you increased target acquisition, accuracy, and aim down sight speed for any weapon that matches the mod. So if we use solar targeting mod, any solar weapons we have equipped will get these bonuses. And the rest of the mods on helmets give different ways to generate super energy and a few other miscellaneous effects. For example, the Ashes to Assets mod gives you bonus super energy on grenade kills. All mods are generally pretty straightforward, and reading them will usually tell you what you need to know. But what's important is how you combine them together. Speaking of which, you can combine multiple copies of the same mod to increase the potency of their effects. But the more you equip, you'll start to get diminishing returns on each one. Exact amounts vary, and you can probably find that information online, but keep that in mind. As for gauntlets, you have access to loader mods, dexterity mods, and some mods relating to your grenades and melees. Loader mods will increase the reload speed of any weapons that match the element type. So, the stasis loader mod will increase the reload speed of all your stasis weapons. This costs 3 energy. If we were to use the harmonic loader mod, however, it will decrease the reload speed of any weapons that match the element of your currently equipped subclass. In this case, I'm using Strand, so I can reload my Strand weapons way faster at a reduced mod cost, 2 versus 3 energy. Dexterity mods increase the speed at which you ready and stow your weapons. So again, same thing. Strand Dexterity increases the speed for any strand weapons. And lastly, we have an assortment of mods affecting grenades and melees, such as Firepower, which will generate an orb of power on grenade kills. Moving on to the chest piece, we have access to mods that give you varying types of damage reduction, Unflinching aim mods, ammo reserve mods, and a few other singular one-off ones. When it comes to the damage resistant mods, there's one for everything. There are ones that reduce the damage you take from every element, as well as sniper damage, melee damage, and AoE damage. You can stack these for an increased effect. The unflinching aim mods grant you increased flinch resistance for any weapons that match the element. So, unflinching arc aim will grant you flinch resistance for arc weapons. Flinch resistance reducing the amount your gun kicks while aiming and taking damage at the same time. Reserve mods grant you larger ammo reserves for your weapons. I'm sure you've noticed the elemental theming, but once again, void reserves granted for void weapons, solar for solar, and so on. I'm sure you get the idea. I bet you've also noticed from the footage that I've been skipping over some mods on the page. There's a reason for that, and we'll come back to it shortly. Moving on to the boots, we can use scavenger mods, holsters, weapon surge mods, and some mods that grant benefits when picking up orbs of power. Scavengers grant you increased ammo for your weapons when running over a brick of ammo. However, this is one of the few mod types that gets no benefit for more than one copy of the same mod. Holster mods will slowly reload your weapons from reserves over time. Equip more of these mods and they will reload faster. Weapon surges can provide a bonus to weapon damage of a certain type while you have an armor charge. Now, I have not mentioned armor charges at all yet, but I want you to keep that term in the back of your mind for a moment. And this top row of mods gives various bonuses when picking up an orb of power. For example, recuperation replenishes your health every time you pick up an orb. Very straightforward. Just read it and it will tell you exactly what it does. Finally, on to our final armor piece, the class item. Class items house mods that can grant you different ability cooldowns when using your class ability, and finisher mods. Finisher mods provide benefits when using your finisher on an enemy, most of which require the consumption of armor charges to activate. And there's that word again. Let's finally talk about it. So, while most of the mods are rather simple, you just equip them and use them, some of them are a bit more involved. In the past, these were called combat style mods, and they altered the way you played. We had several different types of them. With the launch of Lightfall, however, they have all been condensed into the armor charge system. If you've played before, it's basically the exact same thing as the old Charged with Light mods, with a few tweaks. If you're brand new, here's how they work. You may have noticed that I've been skipping over a couple of these mods, specifically the yellow, green, and blue colored ones. These are part of the armor charge family. Think of it as a resource you can earn in combat. The general gameplay loop is this: acquire an armor charge with one or multiple types of mods, and use other mods to spend that armor charge and gain an effect. Pretty simple at face value, I know. When it comes to their colors, each one communicates a different thing. Green mods allow you to generate an armor charge for yourself or for others. For example, the shield break charge mod on your gauntlets gives you an armor charge every time you break a combatant shield with the same damage type. So if you have this mod equipped and you break a solar shield with a solar weapon, you will get an armor charge. This charge will stay with you until you use it. Easy. Blue mods do the same thing, albeit slightly differently. These mods allow you to generate an armor charge every time you collect an orb of power, as well as another effect. However, your armor charge status is now a buff that decays over time, rather than a permanent resource you keep until you spend it. For example, Solar Weapon Surge will give your solar weapons a damage buff anytime you have an armor charge, but now you have a timer. Each time the timer ticks down all the way, you lose one charge. This continues until you either refresh the charge or run out of them. Finally, the yellow mods let you consume armor charges to grant an effect. Going back to finishers, the Healthy Finisher mod will heal you every time you perform a finisher, but it will consume one armor charge each time. If you don't have any armor charges available, the mod will do nothing. Now, when it comes to armor charges, there is a limit to how many you can hold. The display on your HUD shows 6 slots. You can only hold 3 to start with. If you want to hold more, you'll need to use copies of the Charged Up Chest mod, which will increase your maximum charges by 1. Additionally, you can use the Time Dilation class item mod to increase the time you have before armor charges decay if you're using the blue mods. And now, we're finally done with the armor mod overview. That was a lot to grasp all at once, but I promise it's a lot simpler than it may sound to some. Just take some time and read the mod descriptions, as well as actually trying them out. I'm sure you'll get the hang of it. It's really easy. There is also the possibility that Bungie will add more mods and mod types in the future, but for now, this is all we have. If you're still confused by this, at the end of the video I will have a sample build that I've made to showcase how everything works in tandem. Alright, now that that's over, let's talk about the seasonal artifact. This is something you typically gain access to through the Lightfall campaign, as well as the seasonal content in the future. We get a new one every 3 months, and it does a couple of things. The first is grant you bonus power levels that stack on top of your gear level. Not really that important to build crafting, but I wanted you to know. The next part though. Each season, the artifact will have a unique set of bonuses you can unlock. In the past, these were mods you could unlock and slot into your armor. But with Lightfall, these are now passive buffs that are active at all times, but you can still think of them as mods if you want to. The way the artifact works changes often, so it's hard to say how it will all look in the future, but for now, it's like this. There are a total of 25 mods. You can unlock 12 at any given time. If you don't like some of the ones you picked, you can reset the artifact and pick again for no cost. The mods are split into columns, and you gain access to more columns the more mods you have unlocked. In the first column on the left, we have champion mods. These are buffs added to your weapons that allow you to stun champions. So, for example, I have anti-barrier pulse, so now every pulse rifle I use for the rest of the season can stun barrier champions. The second column is new to Lightfall. These are authorized mods, as well as one multi-siphon mod. The authorized mods reduce the energy cost for any mod relating to that element. So, with authorized mods solar, any mod that has to do with solar energy has a reduced cost. Now, this multi-siphon mod adds a few mods to your inventory that give you a 2-for-1 benefit. In this case, combining the Strand Siphon with Void and Solar Siphon. The rest of the mods are somewhat random and depend on the themes of each season, but typically, the closer you get to the right column, the stronger the mods become. For example, Volatile Flow here grants all of your Void weapons volatile rounds every time you pick up an Orb of Power. And remember, this is a passive buff. You do not have to equip anything for this to work. Just take a read through the artifact mods each season and I'm sure you'll get the hang of it. Okay, so we have 2 or 3 more topics left before the example build. So moving on, I want to talk about champions. Previously, champions were only ever to be stunned with weapon mods or very specific champion mods on each artifact. If you haven't seen a champion yet, or don't know what it is, it's basically one of 3 enemy types that have special mechanics and you need to stun them a certain way. Barrier champions will raise an impenetrable shield as their health gets lower. You need something with anti-barrier effects to stun it. When a champion is stunned, it also takes additional damage during that time. Overload champions will constantly regenerate their health until you stun them. You need overload capabilities to do that. And unstoppable champions will continuously rush you and cannot be staggered until you stun them. You need something with unstoppable capabilities to do that. Now, as I said, previously you were pigeonholed in only a few ways to accomplish this, but Bungie changed this with Lightfall. You see these champion symbols on your character screen? They tell you a few things. Firstly, they'll tell you if you have anything equipped that can stun champions. Secondly, they'll tell you every single possible way to do that. You see, Bungie decided to take all of the effects from each subclass and use them as ways to stun champions. So, barrier champs, you can stun them with the radiant effect from solar subclasses, which also includes standing in a well of radiance, or Strand's unraveling rounds, or Void's volatile rounds, or just normal anti-barrier weapons. You can effectively stun champions with any weapon or class in the game if you build around it. Overload, Arc's jolt effect, Void's suppression, Stasis is slow, all effective. Unstoppable, Arc's blinding, Solar's ignition, Stasis' shatter, and Strand's suspend effects can all stun those. Champions are actually kind of fun to fight now in my opinion with all the different methods of stunning them. So, as you're building, make sure you take your subclass into account. It can have a massive impact on your experience. Now, let's take a moment to talk about weapons. Weapons are easy. There's a lot of perks out there, and most of them are useful for at least a few things, but it really depends on the content that you're playing. If you're ever doubting your perks, anything that improves damage or reload speed is usually a good pick. But there are others. For example, here I'm making large use of a perk called Demolitionist. Every time I throw my grenade, it reloads my weapons, and kills with this weapon gives back grenade energy. It's simple but effective. And even one good weapon with a good perk like this can form a large centerpiece of your build. Do not sleep on your weapons. I can't go into more detail than that because everyone has different gear, but keep it in mind. And last but not least, before we get into our example build anyway, is Loadouts. This just got recently added into the game by Bungie, but you can save any of your builds to a loadout and equip it at any time as long as you aren't in an activity with restricted loadouts. There are preset names, colors, and icons you can swap through and save, and if you ever make a change, you can easily overwrite the loadout. As long as you have space in your inventory, the loadout will also pull from your vault and other characters. However, it cannot shove things back into your vault for you. This is an invaluable feature I wish was here far sooner, but I'm just happy it's finally here now. And you can have up to 10 different loadout slots after completing certain Guardian ranks objectives. And with that, that is all of the basics of buildcrafting. Thank you for sticking with me this far, I hope it was helpful. You may have noticed I didn't go over specific subclasses, because honestly, those kinda deserve guides on their own, and I already have introduction videos made for them. Also, they're kinda just personal preference on what you want to play, so go nuts. Now, let's take a moment and go over my example build I've been running on my Warlock lately, and we'll be done. Now, this build may not be perfect yet, but it has a lot of utility and I've been having a good time with it so far. To start, the subclass. We're using Strand, and the core of it will revolve around shackle grenades and suspending enemies. Suspend effects keep enemies from literally doing anything, and it's very powerful, and it can even stun unstoppable champions. As for my aspects, we only have 2 for now, but one effect of Mind Spun Invocation is the ability to consume my shackle grenade to enter Weaver's Trance. While I have this buff, any final blows I get will emit a burst that suspends any enemies around the enemy that just died. As for my fragments, I'm currently using Thread of Continuity, which gives me a bonus to strength as well as improving the duration of all my strand effects, Thread of Generation, which lowers my discipline but gives me grenade energy every time I deal damage, Thread of Finality, which creates threadlings every time I perform a finisher, as well as increasing my recovery, and lastly, Thread of Warding, which grants me Woven Mail every time I pick up an Orb of Power, but it lowers my resilience. Moving on to my weapons, the choices are pretty simple and could even be edited, but this is fine for now. Starting with my enhanced Demolitionist and Chill Clip Deliverance, this thing will be generating a lot of grenade energy for me, as well as freezing any enemies that provide a problem. Keep in mind it's stasis. For my primary, I'm using the Unforgiven with Demolitionist Golden Tricorn. Demolitionist, again, is the star here, but it's also a Void SMG and will take advantage of 2 of my artifact mods, Overload SMG and Volatile Flow. Volatile Flow will grant me volatile rounds to this gun each time I pick up an Orb of Power, and then I can also stun champions with it. For my heavy, I'm using Chain of Command, a Stasis 450 LMG with Adrenaline Junkie and, you guessed it, Demolitionist. I could honestly use whatever I want in this slot, but more grenade synergy will always be nice. Moving on to armor, let's start with my exotic, Nezarec Sin. I mentioned this armor piece already, but Nezarec gives me ability energy for any void kills. Currently, my Unforgiven takes advantage of this, but I could also use a void heavy weapon if I wanted to as well. As far as my armor stats go, I'm mostly leaning into resilience and recovery, using mods to make up what I lack in resilience. I also have a tier 6 discipline and intellect, but my discipline stat doesn't really matter much with all the grenade focused perks and mods I'm running, could definitely be optimized further with better armor drops in the future, but for now, this is solid. As far as mods go, on the helmet, I'm rocking Stasis and Void Siphon, as well as Special Ammo Finder. The Siphon mods let me create Orbs of Power from all of my weapon multi-kills, and the Special Ammo Finder fuels my Deliverance, but I could easily swap it for Heavy Ammo Finder should I choose. Moving to the gloves, I'm mostly just using Stasis Loader and Melee Kickstart, could change in the future, but this will help my strands melee and load my weapons. As for the chest, I'm using Font of Endurance. This allows me to gain armor charges for every orb I pick up, as well as grant me a bonus to resilience. However, now my armor charges will decay over time. Stasis Reserves giving me more ammo to use for my special and heavy weapon. On the boots, I have Innervation, which gives me even more grenade energy when I pick up an Orb of Power, as well as Stasis Surge and Void Surge, which is just more bonus damage to all of my weapons if I have an armor charge. And finally, on my class item, I have a free resilience mod from my Artifice armor, putting me right at tier 9, as well as Empowered Finish. That grants me armor charges whenever I cast a finisher if I do not already have one, as well as Time Dilation, which increases the duration of my armor charge decay. So, if you've been piecing all of this together, my build looks something like this. Use shackle grenades on everything to keep them from even being able to shoot at me. My weapons grant me grenade energy on kills, and even for dealing damage. Every time I pick up an Orb of Power, I gain Woven Mail for my subclass, which is damage resist, as well as volatile rounds for my SMG and any other void weapon I choose to use, as well as armor charges, which gives me more damage to all of my weapons, and a bonus to resilience, and melee kickstart to give me more melee energy back when I need it. Essentially, just chaining grenades, woven mail, volatile rounds, and more grenades. Is it perfect or the most broken thing ever? Most definitely not. But it's a very fun and effective build that takes advantage of all the different aspects of your kit and can even stun all 3 types of champions. If you're wondering how I'm stunning barriers, it's through the volatile rounds. But I think that's enough for today. I really hope I was able to help and provide plenty of useful info for new and returning players alike. If you enjoyed it, consider dropping a like and subscribing. Really helps me out and keeps me motivated. Maybe even share it with your friends just getting into the game. But with that being said, my name is Yami, and I will see you beautiful people next time.